"I need you to start training," the executive said, looking directly at me. "She'll be taking over your role in the next few months." I stared right at the executive and the young woman sitting beside him, my heart pounding with disbelief. After 12 years of dedicated service to the company, this was how my loyalty was being repaid. The woman next to him couldn't have been older than 25, twirling her blonde hair around her finger while examining her manicured nails. She hadn't even bothered to look up when she was introduced as my replacement. "No," I said simply, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. The silence in that corner office was deafening. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Phoenix headquarters, the desert sun cast long shadows across the conference table, where my career was apparently being terminated. The executive's eyebrows shot up in surprise, as if no one had ever dared question his authority before. The woman finally glanced up from her phone, looking mildly interested in the drama unfolding. "Excuse me," the executive said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge I'd heard him use with vendors who dared to negotiate prices. I said no. I crossed my arms and maintained eye contact. "I won't be training anyone to replace me without a proper discussion about my future with this company. I'm 41 years old, and for the past 12 years I've been the operations manager here, overseeing everything from vendor relationships to contract negotiations. I know every system, every client preference, and every operational detail that keeps this company running smoothly. When vendors call with problems, they ask for me. When clients need urgent modifications, I'm the one who makes it happen. But 6 months ago, everything changed. The executive's investment firm acquired the company from the founding family, and things began to unravel quickly. The transition was rocky from the start. He implemented cost-cutting measures that often backfired. He'd already driven away 2 experienced managers, replacing them with younger, cheaper alternatives who quit within weeks. Now, apparently, it was my turn. "She brings fresh perspectives to the role," he said, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was diplomatic. "She has a degree in business administration from Arizona State." I glanced at the woman, who was now taking a selfie. "Does she have any manufacturing experience? Any understanding of our client base or vendor relationships?" "That's what the training period is for," he replied curtly. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being asked to hand over 12 years of institutional knowledge to someone who clearly had no interest in learning it, all while being pushed toward the exit. The history between the executive and me had been contentious from the start. Unlike the previous owners, the founding family, who treated employees like valued partners, this new leadership saw us as expendable resources. The former owners had promoted me 3 times, recognizing my ability to streamline operations and build lasting relationships. I remembered a conversation with the previous owner's son just weeks before the acquisition. We'd been reviewing quarterly reports when he paused and said, "I want you to know your position is secure regardless of who takes over. Your operational knowledge is irreplaceable. Any smart buyer would recognize that." If only he'd known how wrong he'd be. The executive made his intentions clear during his first staff meeting. "We're going to modernize operations," he'd said, gesturing to a PowerPoint slide filled with corporate buzzwords: fresh thinking, innovative approaches, streamlined processes. What he really meant was replacing experienced employees with cheaper, more compliant alternatives. In the months that followed, I watched him dismantle the systems that had made the company profitable. He alienated our biggest client by attempting to renegotiate long-standing contracts. He switched to cheaper suppliers without understanding the implications, leading to 2 major product recalls. I tried to guide him, offering insights on client preferences and industry best practices, but he wasn't interested in learning. He wanted to implement his vision, regardless of the consequences. The breaking point came last week when I discovered his personal relationship with the woman now sitting beside him. She had been hanging around the office for months, initially introduced as a consultant. But office gossip travels fast. It became clear their relationship went far beyond professional boundaries. She'd been seen leaving his apartment, joining him for business dinners, and now, she was being groomed to take over my position. During meetings, she showed zero interest. While I explained complex client requirements, she was texting or checking her reflection. When vendors called with technical questions, she transferred them to me without even attempting to understand the issues. She couldn't distinguish between manufacturing processes, had never read a contract, and thought our biggest client was a clothing company rather than an industrial supplier. But she was young, attractive, and more importantly, she was his. "I think you're overthinking this," he continued, snapping me back to the present. She's eager to learn. Your experience would be invaluable. I looked at her again. She was now applying lip gloss, ignoring our conversation entirely. The request wasn't just professionally insulting. It was a slap in the face. This wasn't a training opportunity. It was a systematic replacement. He wanted me to hand over everything I'd built to his mistress, then quietly disappear. What happens to my position after the training period? I asked, though I already knew. His slight hesitation confirmed it. We'll evaluate the organizational structure as we move forward. There might be opportunities in other departments. Translation: I'd be demoted, sidelined, or eliminated once she had what she needed. I thought about the multimillion-dollar contract I'd personally negotiated last year. The countless nights I stayed late resolving complications. The suppliers I'd called personally. The purchasing managers who trusted my word above any written agreement. Now I was supposed to hand all of that over to someone who couldn't be bothered to look up from her phone. I need time to consider this, I said, standing. There's nothing to consider, he replied sharply. This is a directive, not a request. She starts shadowing you tomorrow morning. That was it. An ultimatum. Train my replacement or face the consequences. I looked around the office that had become so familiar. The awards for operational excellence. The framed photos of company milestones. The facility I'd helped plan. And now, a choice that would define the end of my chapter here. The manager was willing to throw all of that institutional knowledge away for the sake of a personal relationship, gambling the company's operational stability on someone who had never worked a day in manufacturing, never dealt with the complexities of supply chain management, and never felt the pressure of meeting client deadlines. I understand your position perfectly, I said, my voice calm but resolute, and my answer remains the same, no. I will not train anyone to replace me. The executive's face flushed red. I don't think you understand the situation, he said. This company is moving in a new direction, and if you can't adapt, then we'll need someone else to implement that direction. I understand perfectly, I interrupted, meeting his glare without flinching. The younger woman finally looked up from her phone, seeming to realize that the conversation had taken a serious turn. Is there a problem? She asked, her voice carrying the entitled tone of someone who had never faced real consequences. The problem, I thought to myself, was that the executive was about to learn exactly how much he'd taken for granted. But that lesson would come later. 2 hours later, I was sitting in human resources with termination papers spread across the table. The HR director, who had processed my promotion paperwork 3 times over the years, looked genuinely uncomfortable as she slid the documents toward me. I want you to know this wasn't my recommendation, she said quietly, glancing toward the door as if the executive might be listening. Your performance reviews have been exceptional, and your operational knowledge is, well, it's irreplaceable. I scanned the termination letter, noting the carefully worded language about organizational restructuring and strategic realignment. No mention of my refusal to train a replacement. No acknowledgement of my 12 years of service. And most insulting of all, no severance package. Effective immediately. I asked, pointing to the date. The HR director nodded reluctantly. He wants a clean transition. The new hire will be starting in the operations department tomorrow morning. The absurdity of the situation struck me. They were terminating the person who actually knew how to run operations while installing someone who couldn't tell the difference between a purchase order and a shipping manifest. It was corporate suicide disguised as innovation. I'll need to collect my personal items, I said, standing up. Of course. Security will escort you to your office. The walk back felt surreal. The security guard who had greeted me every morning for 8 years looked embarrassed as he accompanied me down the familiar hallway. Other employees watched from their cubicles, whispering among themselves. Word traveled fast in a company this size. At my desk, I began packing 12 years of accumulated memories, photos from company retreats, awards for operational excellence, thank you cards from grateful clients. But more importantly, I discreetly copied key operational documents onto a portable drive, procedures I'd developed, client contact lists I'd maintained, and vendor relationships I'd cultivated. Technically, this information belonged to me as much as to the company. I'd created most of these processes from scratch, building systems that transformed the business from a struggling manufacturer into an industry leader. If the executive wanted to discard my contributions, he couldn't expect me to leave behind everything I'd built. My computer password was still active, giving me access to files that contained detailed information about client preferences, supplier relationships, and operational procedures that existed nowhere else. The largest account alone required knowledge of specific quality control measures, shipping protocols, and communication preferences that I'd documented but never formally transferred to company databases. As I worked, I could see the new hire through the glass partition, sitting in the conference room with the executive. He was showing her organizational charts. She nodded absently while scrolling through her social media feed, clearly more interested in that than understanding the business she was supposedly ready to manage. "Take your time," the security guard said quietly. "This whole situation is ridiculous." Even the security staff could see the insanity of what was happening. Experienced employees don't just materialize overnight, and operational expertise can't be downloaded like software. The executive was about to learn that lesson the hard way. My phone buzzed with a text message from a former colleague who now worked for one of our biggest competitors. "Heard about what happened. Coffee tomorrow? We should talk." He had been reaching out periodically over the past few months, subtly suggesting that his company was expanding their operations division. At the time, I hadn't been interested. This company had been my professional home, and I'd remained loyal despite questionable leadership. Now everything had changed. I finished packing my personal items, handed over my building access card, and walked out for what I assumed would be the last time. But as I reached my car, I realized this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else entirely. The executive thought he could discard me like outdated equipment, replacing institutional knowledge with inexperience and loyalty with convenience. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The next morning, I met my former colleague at a quiet cafe downtown, far from the industrial district where both companies operated. He was already waiting when I arrived, scanning the morning news on his tablet while sipping coffee. "I have to say," he said as he stood to greet me, "their timing couldn't be better for us." He had been the supply chain manager at my former company before leaving 3 years ago to join the competitor. He'd tried to convince me to follow him then, but I'd been committed to seeing through major projects. Now, sitting across from him in the morning sunlight, I wished I'd listened. "Tell me about the position," I said without preamble. "Director of Operations, reporting directly to the CEO. Salary increase of 30% over what you were making, plus performance bonuses tied to client acquisition and retention." He slid a folder across the table. "We've been tracking their struggles since the leadership changed. Some of their biggest clients have been expressing concerns about service quality and operational consistency." I opened the folder to find a detailed job description that seemed tailored specifically to my experience. His company was planning an aggressive expansion into the same market segments where my previous company had traditionally dominated. They needed someone who understood not just the technical aspects of manufacturing operations, but the relationship management that kept clients satisfied. "There's something else," he continued, lowering his voice. "One of their largest clients has been in preliminary discussions about moving their account. Their purchasing manager specifically asked if we had anyone with experience managing their requirements." My pulse quickened. I had worked with that purchasing manager for 6 years, building a relationship based on trust and reliability. That account represented nearly 20% of my previous company's annual revenue, and she had always valued the personal attention I gave to their complex orders. "They haven't made any commitments yet," he explained, "but they are clearly frustrated with the changes." The executive tried to renegotiate their contract terms last month, proposing cost increases the client found unreasonable. I wasn't surprised. The executive had a habit of viewing client relationships as purely transactional, failing to understand the personal connections and trust that kept major accounts loyal. He'd probably presented that manager with a spreadsheet analysis. Rather than acknowledging the value placed on reliable service and consistent communication, the question was asked, "When would you need an answer?" The response came quickly. "The position needs to be filled within 2 weeks. We're announcing our expansion plans at the Industry Manufacturing Conference next month, and we want our operational leadership in place before then." That conference had been attended for the past 8 years, representing the previous company at vendor meetings and client presentations. This year, the former employer had planned to use the conference as a platform to announce operational modernization initiatives, with the inexperienced replacement presumably playing a prominent role. The irony was almost poetic. While one party showcased an unqualified successor, the other would be across the hall representing a competitor's expansion. "I'm interested," came the answer, the folder closing with intent. "Very interested." The hiring manager smiled. "I hoped you would be. There's one more thing," You should know that our CEO specifically requested this meeting. She's been following your career for years and considers you one of the most respected operations managers in the industry. The next hour was spent discussing expansion plans, client acquisition strategy, and the operational improvements that were soon to be implemented. Everything described aligned perfectly with the systems and processes that had once been developed at the former company, except now, there would be leadership support and resources that had never been granted under previous ownership. By the time the cafe was left behind, the decision was already made. The previous employer had discarded someone without understanding their value. The competitor was offering a chance to demonstrate what that mistake would cost. Within a week, the hiring was official. The transition was seamless, almost too easy, as though the universe was correcting a cosmic injustice. The final interview was conducted by the CEO herself, and her enthusiasm for the experience offered was a refreshing contrast to the dismissive attitude of the past. "We've been waiting for the right person to lead our expansion," she explained. "Your reputation in the industry precedes you. And frankly, their loss is our gain." Meanwhile, reports from former colleagues painted a picture of escalating chaos. The new appointee had indeed started in operations, but without guidance, was struggling with even the most basic tasks. According to one production supervisor, several costly mistakes had already been made. A shipment had been approved to a key client that didn't meet specifications. That client had called 3 times, trying to reach someone who understood their quality requirements, only to be passed between departments. It was exactly as predicted. Complex manufacturing operations couldn't be managed by someone lacking experience, regardless of education or personal relationships with leadership. Client needs, vendor ties, and internal processes had been shaped by years of hands-on work and institutional knowledge, none of which could be downloaded or mimicked overnight. When asked what the former employer had done in response to the client's complaints, the answer was absurd. The blame was pinned on the production team for not training the new manager. Then, a 3-day seminar was arranged in hopes it would solve everything. It was laughable. 3 days of generic instruction couldn't replace over a decade of operational depth and client trust. Leadership was clinging to the illusion that expertise could be purchased rather than earned. But attention was now turned toward preparing for the upcoming conference. The new employer had moved up the expansion announcement, eager to capitalize on the instability at the former company. "We're going to make a statement," the CEO said in one planning session. "We're not just competing, we're presenting ourselves as the premium option for clients who value excellence." The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than attacking the former employer directly, the plan was to showcase superior systems and let clients draw their own conclusions. The role? To lead those operational presentations, showcasing how reliability, detail, and personal service could thrive under proper leadership. The key client who had previously been neglected had already agreed to a meeting during the conference, not yet ready to switch suppliers, but clearly curious. Other clients, too, had taken interest, having heard about the recent move through industry channels. 2 weeks before the event, an unexpected call came from the HR representative at the former company. "I probably shouldn't be calling you," she said. "But I wanted you to know, he's planning to announce the new operations manager as the official director during the conference. He scheduled presentations about innovative management and fresh perspectives." The news wasn't surprising, but it was useful. Leadership was doubling down, publicly promoting someone whose qualifications had already proven insufficient. The company's reputation was being risked on someone who couldn't handle client conversations, much less strategic decisions. "Thank you for the heads up," came the reply. "I hope you know that most of us never supported what happened," the HR representative said gently. "That decision was made alone." As the call ended, it became clear. The industry conference would be more than a networking opportunity. It would be the moment where arrogance met reality, and where a decade of expertise would finally be recognized. The morning of the conference, the convention center buzzed with familiar faces, vendors, clients, and peers who had all worked together for years. The key client approached first, smiling warmly. "I heard about your move. Congratulations. I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk." Before a response could come, a commotion arose at the registration area. The former boss had arrived, flanked by a small entourage. The newly promoted manager wore a bright red dress more suited to a cocktail party than a business gathering. The boss wore a smug expression, certain of a triumph. "Is that the new operations manager?" the client asked, following the gaze. "That's the one handling your account requirements," came the neutral reply. The client raised an eyebrow. The same one who's been struggling to meet our specs. A nod was the only answer. There was no need to say more. The client murmured, "Well, I'm looking forward to your presentation. Your current CEO speaks very highly of what you've accomplished." As she walked away, a former colleague appeared at the shoulder, grinning. "Ready for this?" "More than ready," came the reply, eyes following as the former boss led a confident march toward the main hall where the 10 a.m. presentation was scheduled. The new hire trailed behind the owner, checking her appearance in every reflective surface they passed. The contrast between the former company's presentation and the competitors became apparent within the first 10 minutes. The owner had positioned the new hire at the center of the operational strategy discussion, introducing her as the future of manufacturing management. She read nervously from prepared notes that clearly described concepts she didn't fully understand. When a veteran purchasing manager from a major industry supplier asked about quality control protocols for specialized orders, her response was a rambling explanation about leveraging synergies and implementing innovative solutions. The audience exchanged glances, recognizing corporate speak that masked a complete lack of substantive knowledge. The owner tried to rescue the situation by jumping in with his own technical explanations, but his answers revealed that he hadn't absorbed much operational knowledge during his 6 months in leadership. He confused supplier terminology, misrepresented delivery timelines, and made commitments about capabilities the company couldn't reliably provide. By contrast, the competitor's afternoon presentation felt like a masterclass in operational excellence. The CEO introduced me as the new director of operations, emphasizing over a decade of experience and strong industry relationships. When I took the podium, I could see familiar faces throughout the audience, clients, vendors, and colleagues who knew my work firsthand. My presentation focused on practical solutions rather than theoretical innovations. I discussed specific examples of complex problem-solving, relationship management strategies that had saved critical accounts, and operational improvements that had delivered measurable results. When questions came from the audience, I provided detailed, knowledgeable responses that demonstrated deep understanding of manufacturing challenges. The difference was unmistakable. Where the former leadership offered buzzwords and promises, I provided evidence and expertise. Where they proposed untested theories, I shared proven solutions that audience members had witnessed personally. After the presentation, the responses were overwhelmingly positive. The lead purchasing manager from a major account was the first to approach, but she wasn't alone. Other purchasing managers and industry professionals crowded around, eager to discuss potential partnerships and explore the competitor's expanded capabilities. The so-called revolution was colliding with my evolution, and the outcome was becoming increasingly clear. Looking back now, I realized that being fired for refusing to train my replacement was the greatest gift the owner could have given me. It forced me to recognize my true worth and find an organization that valued experience over appearances. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't what you do to someone, it's becoming successful enough that their dismissal of you becomes their greatest regret. In the end, I didn't need to destroy anyone. I simply let them destroy themselves while I built something better.